Hello, welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. It's Funmi doing this audit today. So we're going to be going through a series of cookie notices and cookie policies, and we're also going to be looking at privacy policies. Today's review is going to be on Etsy. We're going to be looking at the cookie policy. So for anybody that's not familiar with Etsy, you can sell handcrafted goods. It's actually expanded outside of handcrafted goods. You can sell a variety of goods on Etsy. So I wanted to look at their cookie, they call it a cookie and similar technology policy. Now I've talked about this in other reviews. The term policy from a data protection standpoint is generally an internal document. It's something that would be shared with employees, and it would tell them how cookies are used internally, as opposed to a notice, which basically tells consumers of Etsy products how cookies are utilized on the website. Now, sometimes it applies to mobile applications too, but you'd have to look at the cookie notice on the website to see what's applicable. Here we can see in this particular policy, they're referring to Etsy.com as the site and Etsy's mobile applications. Now, depending on who the vendor is, sometimes they'll have a cookie notice for the website and then they'll have a separate one for the mobile application. It just depends, which is why it's really important for consumers to read these notices and policies to understand what even applies to them. So they've generally referred to this information as services. The one thing that I think is interesting is we weren't presented with a cookie banner. And for anybody that's new on my channel, a cookie banner is generally like a pop-up that generally displays when you land on a site for the first time. Now, the reason why you should be seeing that banner is because the banner represents notice to consumers that the fact that cookies are going to be collected as they interact with the site. Under the data protection law, a cookie is considered personal data because a cookie identifies an individual. Now, the definition of personal data will vary based on geography. In the US, there's definitions of personal data. In other jurisdictions, the definition of personal data might vary. Generally, cookies will identify you as an individual, which is why you generally will see a policy or notice on a website that is owned by an organization. So we weren't presented with the banner. I'm just going to scroll to the bottom before we review the entire policy and see if there's an opportunity for us to opt out of cookies being collected. It may be that the reason we weren't presented with the banner is because I'm accessing the site from the United States, and the obligations that organizations like Etsy have for consumers in the United States is to present us with the opportunity to opt out of cookies. Whereas in other geographies, consumers have the opportunity to opt into cookies. So as I interact with the site, there's certain cookies that are being collected. I'm going to click on the privacy settings and I'm actually going to opt out. You can see it's been turned on. This is what I meant by opting in. I've already been opted in for personalized advertising to be enabled by Etsy. But I'm going to opt out, which is my right as a US consumer, and I'm going to save that. I am intrigued because Etsy has stated that there's required cookies and technology, okay? Some of the technologies we use are necessary for critical functions like security and site integrity, account authentication, security and privacy preferences, internal site usage, maintenance data, and to make the site work correctly for browsing and transactions. So this language and terminology, I presume, has been curated for the types of cookies that Etsy utilizes as you interact with the services, which is what they've demonstrated at the top of the cookie policy that they have on their site. So why this language is really important is if a particular organization decides to utilize a consent management platform, which a lot of organizations do, the language on the preference center, they've called it privacy settings here. The language on the preference center needs to align with what's on the site. As far as we are concerned as consumers, the only cookies that Etsy is utilizing are those that are required and those that enable personalized advertising. That's my presumption. To enable personalized advertising like interest-based ads, we may share your data with our marketing and advertising partners using cookies and other technologies. So the representation that Etsy has made to me as a consumer is that required cookies and technologies are being utilized, as are personalized advertising. And you can see here that those are the only options we have. Now, what I do find interesting is they've also listed some insights here. Etsy uses cookies and similar technologies to give you a better experience, okay? This isn't necessarily required, right? Analyzing site traffic and usage. my question would be, is this necessary or required cookie? Because all we've been presented here is that there's required cookies that are always turned on, and there are personalized advertising related cookies as well. We can also see insights here saying analyzing site traffic and usage. Now, if there are cookies that are being utilized by Etsy to analyze site traffic and usage, and they're not required as a critical function, consumers should have the opportunity to opt out of this. Same with personalized search, content, and recommendations, right? We should have the option to opt out of this. Now, I don't know if they've considered a personalized search, content, and recommendations to constitute personalized advertising, but that's something that needs to be rectified by the counsel that has put together this privacy setting. Because to me, personalized search, content, and recommendations and analyzing site traffic and usage doesn't necessarily indicate personalized advertising. This seems to be something completely different. Okay, so we're going to save this. Let's go to the top of the cookie and similar technology policy. We've already got the scope here. Okay, so cookies are small data files sent from a server to your web browser. So we've got session cookies, and there's a definition, persistent cookies, and third-party cookies. So let's talk a bit about similar technologies. The reason why organizations have put this insight here is, depending on the geography where the organization operates, there are certain technologies outside of cookies that could constitute personal data. Now, the definition of personal data is information that can be associated with an identifiable individual. So a social widget, which is a button or icon provided by a third-party social media provider that allows you to interact with these social media sites, because this social widget can be associated with an individual, it constitutes personal data, and under the data protection laws, companies need to be transparent about how they use personal data, so it's a flow, right? So that's why they're putting this information here. Now, purposes, let's talk about this. This section here should align with the privacy settings that we reviewed, and one thing that Privacy Counsel will do is they will review this cookie notice and ensure that the representations that a company is making on their cookie policy or notice aligns with what an individual can do as it pertains to managing their own personal preferences. So what I generally will do is I will review these purposes that are listed here against the privacy center section that we saw below. What happens sometimes is organizations will update their cookie policy. We can see that this one was updated on August 25th, 2025, but they won't update the settings that an individual has. When an individual provides their consent, it should be just as easy to provide the consent as it is withdrawing that consent. So you see, I can click the settings here. I'm able to click on and off very easily, and this information is saved. It should be as easy for me to click on as it is for off. There should be no complexities on how I can manage how my data is being used by this organization. Okay, so I want to go back to the top. So what's interesting here is they've listed the purposes, performance and analytics, okay? I'm going to highlight this because we're going to go back to the privacy settings, and this will be the last thing we'll do for this review. Some technologies help provide performance data on how the services are functioning in order to improve Etsy and the services. Now, from my read of this provision, this does not appear to be something that is necessary or critical for the site to function or the services to function, right? This is something that is optional, okay? Help understand how the services are used by the community. This does not seem like something that is mandatory or critical for the site to function. And as such, consumers should be able to opt out of performance and analytics cookies being collected by this organization. Now, if we scroll down to the bottom and we look at the privacy settings, we actually don't have the opportunity to opt out of that. We only have the opportunity to opt out of personalized advertising, which means that this settings button needs some updates. And this is why I do these reviews, because if a regulator was ever to look at this particular privacy settings section and then review it against the description that is placed on the cookie policy, there would be a discrepancy. A lot of organizations need to recognize that any type of representation that they make about how they use personal data needs to align simultaneously against all of the documentation that they have on the site. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you're an organization, you're looking for privacy counsel to help you ensure that you're compliant with the data protection laws, look at the links I have in my description, and I'll see you in another review.